All right.
Go ahead.
All right. Hello, everybody. We're here again for another discussion of Maine Talks. I'm here with Senator Candidate Eric Brakey. Thank you for coming on and
Glad to
talking
be on. I like your shirt.
Thank you. I'm glad to support. A few things I want to take a comment is things that you talked about tonight.
Are you going to be able to hear us from that far?
Yeah, yeah, it's good.
The liberties and the restriction of them. And one of the things you talked about was the Fourth Amendment and the macro data collection. So what can we do to fight the CIA and the deal with private companies to collect our data?
Well, a couple of different things. We can fight this on several fronts. Well, first of all, on the federal level, of course, we can elect people to represent us who believe in the Fourth Amendment, who recognize that what is going on with this mass national surveillance state. We can elect people who recognize that's unconstitutional and that needs to be abolished. And frankly, this is an issue that, sadly, this is an issue where a lot of Republicans fail on. And I'm very sad to admit this. Sometimes when I fought for Fourth Amendment rights and civil liberties in the Maine Senate, I found more support from Democrats than I have from Republicans. But there are some good people there. There's people in the U.S. Senate like Senator Rand Paul, Senator Mike Lee, Republicans who are good on this issue. And then there's also Ron Wyden, a Democrat from I believe from Oregon, who's been a fighter on this issue. I disagree with him on most everything else, but this is one thing that he's been good on. People like Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat congresswoman from Hawaii. I mean, these are people, Republican or Democrat, these are people who understand at least this issue, and I'm looking forward to working with them to fight back against the national surveillance state and to protect our Fourth Amendment right to privacy. But that's on the federal level. On the state level, we can push back in our own way. Now, I sponsored a bill I sponsored a bill as a state senator called the Fourth Amendment Protection Act. Actually, it passed in the Maine House of Representatives but failed in the Maine Senate, which was a shame. But what it would have done was very simple. It just says that to the federal government that we, the state of Maine, with our own taxpayer resources, our own government that we fund with our state tax money, we will not cooperate and facilitate any investigations that are based on information that was acquired in an unconstitutional manner without a warrant as required by the Fourth Amendment. There was a lot of fight back against that, but we got a bipartisan coalition together. Again, it passed the Maine House of Representatives with Republican and Democrat support, though it got shot down and went down in flames in the Maine Senate with bipartisan opposition. So we have a lot of work to do, but. So we can tackle on the state level, on the federal level, but there's a lot we can do on the state level as well. You know, our founding fathers, particularly Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, argued that any federal law that is passed that does not have proper constitutional authorization, so if the federal government takes an authority onto itself that we the people didn't give to them, that law is null and void, and we have no obligation on the state level to enforce it. So we can stand up and we can fight back and nullify unconstitutional federal laws.
Okay.
I love it. That's exactly what people need to hear.
Yeah.
So it's great to have public servants back that up. Now, one thing that they're using to pass all the surveillance is the war on terror. So one thing that I want to ask you about is the current issue right now with Syria and Israel. They're saying there's going to be a bunch of chemical attacks and this and that. Where do you stand on supporting more war, less war? What is your perspective on where we're at right now as a military-industrial complex?
So I believe in an America First foreign policy, which means that we're supposed to make sure that our foreign policy, our military are there to protect America, to protect our country, our borders, our lands, our people, our Constitution. Sadly, over the last several decades, well, I can trace it back even longer than that, there's been a push, but it's really ramped up in the last few decades, for getting involved in countries that never attacked us, that trying to be the policeman of the world, and it doesn't serve our troops. I mean, we're throwing our troops into wars that frankly don't serve America's interests. We've been in Afghanistan now for 17 years. We went in for a good reason. We were attacked, but the people who attacked us are long dead. It's time to declare victory and come home. But we should have learned the mistakes of the past. You know, when I was in high school, we went into Iraq. And I'm sad to say, as a high school student I supported, I thought that we were making the world safe for democracy. I thought that we were spreading democracy and spreading freedom. But we can look and see the chaos that has resulted of this strategy of going into a country, toppling a secular dictator. Secular dictator Saddam Hussein was certainly a bad guy. He wasn't a good guy, not the kind of guy I'd want to associate with. But what has replaced him? It's been even worse. We created a power vacuum in this region. It led to a rise of more radical groups. And then we didn't learn our lesson from the Bush administration. In the Obama administration, they did the exact same thing in Libya. They went into Libya, they took out Muammar Gaddafi, who was a secular dictator. And what happened in the aftermath of that was a rise of ISIS, a rise of radical Islam. And now to the point in Libya, there's been a reemergence of open-air slave markets. The slave trade is thriving in Libya. And this is because of politicians like Angus King and Hillary Clinton having this policy of thinking we can just remake these countries and nation build all across the world. But we still haven't learned our lesson. They want to do the exact same thing in Syria. It has not worked any time we've tried it. So there's this push to take out Assad. Assad, who again, he's a secular dictator, he's a bad guy, but you know what, in comparison to some of the other things we see in the Middle East, I mean, he's a guy who wakes up and shaves his chin every morning. He's a guy who protects the Christians in the region. He's a guy who, certainly there's been a civil war going on, and frankly, politicians like Angus King have voted to arm the rebel factions. Rebel factions in Syria that are allied with groups like ISIS, groups like Al-Qaeda. The people who actually did attack us, they are using our taxpayer money to arm rebel groups allied with the people who actually were responsible for murdering 3,000 Americans on September 11th. There's this continued push. Now there are these chemical weapons attacks that happen in Syria, which you brought up. Every time it happens, Assad says that he had nothing to do with it. He's not responsible for it. Certainly, he would deny that if he were responsible for it. So we should have some skepticism about his claims, but we should ask the question: what does he have to gain from doing that? This civil war that's playing out in Syria, he's winning that civil war. He's winning it. He's beating back these rebel forces allied with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and that politicians like Angus King have been supporting. He's winning it. In fact, the international community has said the only thing that would get us involved to come in and take out Assad is if, like, he were to use chemical weapons against his own people. And so why would he do that? There's been no evidence presented that he was actually responsible for these attacks. We're just supposed to take it on faith. In fact, forces in our own government who pushed us into Iraq, pushed us into Libya, are trying to push us into Syria, are telling us that he's responsible for it, but they don't give us any evidence. I remain skeptical. I want to see the evidence. And frankly, I think that the fact that these forces in our government have been denied that war in Syria that they wanted so long, and that Russia is on the other side of it. Russia is an ally of Assad, who's frankly been rebuffing the rebel groups that our own government has been supporting. I think that ties in a lot with why there's this anti-Russia hysteria that's going on in our country. Russia has been stopping the neocons in our government from getting the war in Syria that they want so badly, and so I'm against the war. I'm against war in Syria. I'm against, if we're going to go to war, our Constitution, first of all, says that Congress must declare war. That's Congress's constitutional responsibility. And I don't think a war in Syria will turn out any better than the war in Libya, the war in Iraq did.
No, very well spoken. I agree with your perspective. The other thing that I want to get to that you talked about is the Federal Reserve, the taxes, and you mentioned tonight the devalue of the dollar, not the inflation of the goods. So how do we get the control of our own money back as a nation and get Congress to finally audit the Fed and figure out where we're at as a country?
Well, one of the first things we can do, of course, the Federal Reserve prints trillions and trillions of dollars in complete secrecy with no accountability whatsoever. We don't get to see their books. We don't get to see what's going on. We found out that they've taken trillions and trillions of dollars and given it out to foreign banks, to big banks. That's our money. And every dollar they print, the value for that dollar comes from every dollar that's already in circulation. So this is the unseen tax on the American people. It's the inflation tax. When the prices of goods are going up across the country and you find that your dollar doesn't stretch as far as it did the day before, that's because of what's going on at the Federal Reserve. Now, I'm proud of the fact that here in Maine, well, there's a bill in Congress that's come through several times, audit the Fed. We want to see what's going on at the Federal Reserve. We have a right to know. It's our money, and they should be accountable to us. 3 of our 4 members of our congressional delegation support audit the Fed. Bipartisan. Bruce Poliquin has voted for audit the Fed. Shelley Pingree has voted for audit the Fed. Susan Collins has co-sponsored audit the Fed. There's one person, however, who has stood in the way and thinks that we don't have the right to know what's going on at the Federal Reserve with our money, and that's Angus King. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to retire Angus King this November. We're going to retire him, and we're going to send him packing. And I'm going to vote for audit the Fed, and once we know what's going on there, I'm hopeful at some point we can even end the Fed, because we don't need a central bank. The central bank is a core plank of the Communist Manifesto. We don't need a central bank controlling our money. We should have a dollar that is tied to a commodity standard like a gold standard. Or short of that, we should allow for competing currencies. We should allow for cryptocurrencies and other currencies to compete, and let currencies compete on the marketplace like any other good.
That's beautiful. I couldn't have said it any better. I love it. The other thing I want to talk about, you talk about Angus King, 30-year elected official, going up against such a powerhouse, knowing how Hillary stole the DNC, how they talk about the Russians affecting our election. Is there any concern of what Angus might be able to pull with his strings of power?
I think that one of the great things in Maine is that we are still a state that uses paper ballots. It's very hard to hack, an election in Maine. It doesn't mean that it's impossible, but we have a system in place. We have systems in place that, frankly, are a lot better than a lot of other states. Some other states, you just go and you punch it into a computer, and you don't know what's going on. We can actually physically count the ballots. There's certainly many things we could do still to improve our elections, but we're pretty good as far as other states go. I will say, I think one thing that shows that we the people still are in charge, still. That the powers that be in Washington, D.C. have not completely hijacked our democratic system yet, is the simple fact that Donald Trump is president. Now, people can agree with Donald Trump agree or disagree with Donald Trump on certain policies. Certainly there are policies I agree with and policies I disagree on. But you can bet the established powers in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump was the last person they wanted to be president. We can see it by the fact how much they are fighting him tooth and nail, trying to do everything they can to wrest the power away from him and return the keys to Washington back to the special interests. So the simple fact that Donald Trump is our president shows that we the people still have a say in our system. And at least for right now, we still do. We just need to show up, we need to vote. We need to show up and vote this November. You can start early voting very soon, but we need to show up and vote this November. And you can't it's not just enough to just vote yourself. You got to get out. You got to bring out your friends, your family. You got to get them out to vote. And once you've done that, you got to go out and you got to knock on your neighbor's doors and you got to get them out to vote. This will only work. We will only be able to save our republic if we all stand and fight together.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. Another thing you talked about, again, here at the convention tonight was the 7th Amendment, the protection of our land. One of the things that's happened here, specifically in the state of Maine, is Nestle has taken over the bottling production of Poland Spring. How do we take back what's ours as a state instead of giving it to a conglomerate?
Yeah. I've had a lot of mixed feelings about this, actually, because I'm a big believer in free markets. I'm a big believer in private property rights, and though someone did point out to me, this is something that's always stuck in my mind. From everything I understand, the operations at Poland Spring and everything else are sustainable, like for right now. They've invested a lot of money in the infrastructure. They don't want these water sources to run dry. But the thing that did kind of stick in my mind is someone pointed out to me, well, what about like in a future where, like, let's say there are droughts in California, and suddenly all of our water is going to California. And certainly we've seen Nestle as a multinational corporation has not always done sustainable practices and good practices for the people across the world. I mean, there are a lot of stories there. I don't quite know the answer, to be certain. I think that we should make sure. I mean, I think that for right now, I think that some of the things going on with Poland Spring are okay for the moment. I think that at least from what I've seen, water is being kind of used sustainably, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will always be the case.
Okay.
We need to be vigilant, and we need to make sure that as contracts are being established with private companies, particularly private companies that don't have that are multinational global companies that don't necessarily care about Maine and our long-term sustainability as a people, we need to make sure that those contracts that we set with them are very strong to protect our interests.
That makes total sense. I don't really think there is a definite plan other than educating people and making sure that we're all, like you said, informed on the contract and making sure it's the best for the people.
Yeah, and make sure you don't have a situation where if there's a drought in California, suddenly our water is being run dry and it's being shipped away.
Yeah, no, I just want to end with your level of importance. Give us your level of importance for this midterm and how we can get in contact with you, find out more about you, and get out there.
You know, we hear it every single election. It seems like every single election people say, this is the most important election of our lifetime. And certainly if every election is the most important election of our lifetime, then no election is the most important election of our lifetime. But you know what? Every election is important because every election asks, I think, a very important question. Is this going to be the time? Is this election, are we going to surrender more of our liberties? And it seems like there are elections where we do and elections where we don't. And once a liberty is lost, it's very hard to get it back again. Sadly, I often see plenty of elections where we're given a choice between two establishment candidates and two political parties, and frankly, when you look at them, you're like, what are the differences between them? I mean, it's like choosing between Pepsi and Coca-Cola. The differences are by matters of degree, and certainly, I don't know, when I look at some of the elections in the past between like Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, between John McCain and Barack Obama, some of these elections I kind of like, well, sometimes what are the big differences? In this race for U.S. Senate, we have huge differences. I'm the only candidate in this race. There are 3 candidates in the race. The other 2 candidates, Angus King and Zach Ringelstein, both want seats of power in Washington, D.C. to be able to tell us how to live, to be able to take our rights and liberties away from us, and to empower Washington, D.C. to rule over us. I'm the only candidate in this race who's running because I want Washington, D.C. to leave us alone and follow the Constitution. We have a big opportunity. We've seen what people like Senator Rand Paul, Senator Mike Lee, we've seen what they've been able to do as individuals, in the U.S. Senate, using their position as a bully pulpit, and also as an opportunity to try to fight against some of the worst unconstitutional policies that come forward. If I win this race, when I win this race, I'm going to be there for at least 6 years. I'm going to be a consistent champion and voice for liberty. And that's an opportunity here in Maine. We can make that choice. So wherever you're watching from, whether you're watching here in Maine or you're watching anywhere else across America, we can make a difference. We can stand and fight for liberty. And if you want to make a difference, if you're here in Maine, you can volunteer. If you're not in Maine, or if you are in Maine, you can also chip in financially. You can go to ericbrakey.com, chip in $5, $10, $25, $100, $2,700, whatever you're able to do, whether it's a very small donation or a very big donation. We're a grassroots-driven campaign. I don't have access to the millions of dollars in special interest money that Angus King has, but you know what? We've got grassroots people willing to do for free what Angus King needs to pay people to do, and that's powerful. But we do need to get our message out there. We need to be able to get up on TV and do the TV ads. We do need to be able to get out the direct mail to voters to let them know who we are, what we're fighting for, and if we do that, we're going to win. I'm very confident. But it takes us all fighting together. So you can go to ericbrakey.com and chip in to donate. You can also follow me at Eric Brakey for U.S. Senate on Facebook, or on Twitter and Instagram at Senator Brakey.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the time.